時代を作ろうとする者がいる。時の流れを超えようとする意志がある。その思いは遥か昔から遠き未来へと広がる。
Balthazar did a pretty good job in Chrono Cross, designing Project Kid to free Shala from the Time Devourer and save the universe. Too bad for everyone after Chrono Cross. Playing God and splitting and reunifying dimensions willy-nilly brought unforeseen consequences. Bad ones. You see, when Surge defeated the Time Devourer and reunified the dimensions, he inadvertently set the stage for Dalton, aka Divine Dragon King of Poor, to get his hands on the Frozen Flame where it rested atop Terra Tower following the events of Chrono Cross. And if that weren't bad enough, Dalton also got access to Chronopolis. Using advanced technology he found there, he learned how to restore time travel functionality to the Epoch, which he'd acquired in 1005 from Guardia Keep. After that, he started flying back and forth to prehistory, trading futuristic weapons and other Chronopolis tech with caveman tribes for Dreamstone, which he used to rebuild the Mammon Machine. Then, he moved his new Mammon Machine and his whole base of operations to 620 AD, where he could steal power from Labos before Chrono and company killed it in 1000 AD. Problem was, the souped-up new version of the Mammon Machine was stronger than the original and sucked so much power from Labos that he had to wake up early as a survival mechanism. Thanks to Dalton, the day of Labos came way earlier than on the original Keystone timeline. On this new, Dalton-corrupted Keystone timeline, Labos breaches the crust of the planet and rains down destruction in 900 AD, 1100 years earlier than before. The result for humanity is mostly the same: massive apocalypse. But not for Dalton and his people. By the time he realized all that happened, he was a puppet of Labos, like Queen Zil before him, so he knew what was coming. He escapes into the future, avoiding centuries of catastrophe, and posting up in the ruined 2300 AD, ruling over the wasteland he created and guiding Labos' offspring into the stars. Except, all that happened, but it also didn't, because in part 1, we learned how Luca, with a little help from Balthazar, made it back to prehistory where she teamed up with Azala and the Reptites to kill Labos just after he crashed on the planet, thereby creating a whole new future, which we are about to explore in this, Chapter 3, of a version of Chrono Break. Picture this. A legion of Reptites stand armed with crazy advanced laser guns. Over the last few years, Dalton has been importing future tech to trade with the humans, but of course these tools of war are only tools and not beholden to one particular species, so the Reptites have been able to get their hands on quite a few of these guns. Even if they understand little of the workings of the machinery, the simplicity of pulling a trigger and vaporizing a target is not lost on them. A couple powerhouses lead this army, including a Black Tyranno, Nizbel, Azala, and of course, Luca, who's still carrying Robo on her back to some functionality. In these prehistoric times, the world has not yet seen a battle of this magnitude. The victory does not come without cost, but it is a victory. You see, Luca correctly predicts that this is their moment. As soon as the dust clears from the impact, Luca and the Reptites storm in there and kill this horrific interplanetary parasite. Just like that, Labos is dead. A heavy weight lifted from Luca's weary shoulders, though she knows not what manner of future she has created. As what happens every time Luca rewrites the planet's entire history by altering some major event in the distant past, her mind turned to the infinitude of lives she had saved and extinguished all at once. What happens to people from a timeline aborted? What about her friends, Chrono, Marl, Frog, Magus, Kid? With her actions here today, would they ever even exist? These things were beyond her now. She'd done what she'd done and Labos was dead. Maybe Balthazar had gone too far, ordering her to do this deed, but she'd complied, hadn't she? No matter the ultimate outcome, it was finished. All the peoples of the planet were now free from Labos' interference. Free to write a new future, not of Labos' making, but of their own. Oh, and one other thing was for sure. No matter what came to pass now, the Dalton-ruled nightmare she'd escaped from had surely been averted. Besides, Kid, Magus, Chrono, and the rest, they were always going to be out there somehow. If there's one thing she learned in her 3 decades on the planet, it was that there were as many worlds as potentialities. But what to do now? Sure, she and Robo had saved the future again, but they were just 2 tiny organisms in eternity, and they still had lives to live. So what to do with the rest of their days? After the battle, Luca wants to go back to the crater right away to study the remains of Lavos, but she doesn't get the chance before she's distracted by big trouble, the kind she can't ignore. Thanks to Luca's warning, the Reptites evacuated Lavos Impact Zone, and most of the Reptites survived. Unfortunately, a lot of the humans didn't. You see, just before Lavos crashed, Migo and Gigi had gathered many warriors from many tribes to a staging ground near Tyranno Lair. They were just about to launch a massive final attack on the Reptites with the intent of ending the war once and for all. Due to religious and symbolic stuff, they had planned their ultimate attack to coincide with the falling of the Red Star. Unfortunately, they had no idea the Red Star was going to fall right on them, and the humans lost almost all their people that day. The survivors reminded Luca of Doan and the others that she and Chrono had met in 2300 AD so long ago, completely defeated, helpless, and hopeless. The fact they were asking the Reptites, their mortal enemies, for help was proof that they'd pretty much given up. Of course, the Reptites smell blood in the water. They're ready to attack and finish the apes once and for all, but Luca and Robo get in the middle of it and stand up for the humans. Luca asks Azala to show mercy to them in exchange for her help earlier. After all, Luca basically saved the whole Reptite race by warning them about the Red Star and getting them away from the crash site. Surely, for that, Azala owed her a favor. Azala had her own feelings about the cost of Luca's help, and the human situation doesn't stir her cold-blooded heart one bit. The apes may have been worthy opponents for a time, but humans and Reptites are not equal. Humans are slaves and nothing more. Azala knows this is her chance to secure Reptite dominance on the planet, probably forever. And yet a tactician as cunning as Azala can't miss the huge opportunity before her. The humans' numbers won't rebound for several generations, and she can bide her time. In the meantime, the most interesting human, Luca, may still serve her well. And so, Azala declares a ceasefire with the apes. There will be no more fighting, and the human refugees can settle in the surrounding regions without fear of Reptite aggression. She says the Reptites are tired of fighting with humans, who had always been the primary aggressor in their war anyway. It's an eyebrow-raising statement, but the humans are in no condition to protest. They accept Azala's olive branch, as the wicked Reptite Queen promises once more that the fighting is over. She only wants to make a new world for everyone. She slyly gives Luca and Robo the task of building a community suitable for the human survivors, and assigns them a whole bunch of Reptites to help out. If Luca wants the humans to be spared, they can be her responsibility. Now, we all know that inside Luca is a blazing spark of curiosity and scientific wonder. Since they'd killed Lavos and the body was just laying around waiting to be studied, that spark had been growing into an inferno. Even though it pained her tremendously to delay the investigation of Lavos, this issue with the humans took priority. Above all, Luca and Robo care about others, and even though the humans attacked Luca before, because she wasn't in the Divine Dragon fan club, now it was a different story. This time, Migo and Gigi were nowhere to be found, and their survivors clearly needed their help. Besides, Robo's dream of healing the enmity between the humans and the Reptites never left Luca's mind. Now it seemed within reach. Could this be their chance? This could be their chance. And so Luca and Robo put all of their energy into this historic effort. Luca's attention turns away from Lavos to the Human Resettlement Project. Meanwhile, Azala secretly unleashes a team of Reptite sages on the crater. They vacuum up any and all useful information about Lavos with the voraciousness of any good scientific team. The shell and the other massive components of Lavos are left at the crash site. The smaller components are taken to the Reptite Sacred Magic Lab. This includes the Lavos bits. For purposes of the study, they are given scientific classifications derived from ancient Reptite mythology, the names of Gob and Pico. The bit designated Gob is, as best the Reptites can tell, fully intact. There's no visible damage to its small alien frame. As for the one they call Pico, that's a different story. Clearly, the battle took its toll on this particular Labos bit, and it's marked heavily with battle scars and scorch marks from the conflict. No matter, for all intents and purposes, the Reptite sages sense no biological activity from either of the things. Despite the bit's puzzling refusal to decompose, the Reptite sages view them as low-interest items and choose to focus most of their attention on the more complex organisms like the core and the remains at the crater. As for Luca and Robo, time passes and they make a lot of honest progress integrating the human survivors into Reptite society. During their time among the survivors, they try to find out what happened to Ayla. Unfortunately, the Ioka and Laruba tribes know her name only vaguely now. It's been a long time since Ayla's fight with Dalton. Nobody knows what happened to her after she challenged the Divine Dragon. Few will even discuss it. For now, it's a dead end. Meanwhile, everything else is going great. Construction on the humans' new community has found a good rhythm. Robo mediates many successful discussions between the Reptites assigned to the project and the humans. Despite Azala's secret racist plans to genocide all the humans, there are Reptites who are slowly coming to view the humans as equals, even friends. Robo's pleased. He knows true unification of the two species will not come right away. After all, the humans and Reptites are dealing with thousands of years of racial conflict, which cannot be easily stripped from their genetic memory. Still, Robo calculates that on their current trajectory, the ceasefire will indeed reach a full peace if given enough time. He stoically admits it's as close to a victory as he's likely to get. With the human situation stabilized, Robo suggests they return their attention to the study of Lavos. He knows what's in his best friend's heart. At long last, Luca has the time and resources to devote herself to the hugest scientific discovery of all time, and learn all that she can about the creature which has haunted her for so long. Finally, she will answer the Inferno's demands. When Luca asks Azala to join the study, Azala is ready for her. Having given her own Reptite sages enough time to glean what they could, she wants to see what this young human might discover that they may have missed. She applauds Luca's achievements with the Human Resettlement Project and says that she would be overjoyed to bring Luca in on the research, proclaiming it as a great moment for Reptite and mankind to be united in this endeavor to understand something so alien to them both. And so, together, they return to the crater. Luca isn't ready for what she finds there. Every scrap of Labos meticulously preserved after the battle that day, now several weeks ago. Reptite investigators probe and prod the shell like a gigantic crime scene. It's a scientist's dream. Azala appoints Luca a lead investigator at the site, with full access to the crater whenever necessary. Luca's first priority is identifying the different forms of Lavos. She studies the dead core and shell exhaustively before moving on to the strange proxy forms that appear when Lavos assumes certain battle styles, like that of the Black Tyranno. What relationship do those things have to Lavos? Which thing was even the real Lavos? Were these part of it, or another life form? Would Queen Zeal have become something like this if given enough time under Lavos' corruptive influence? From what she'd seen of Lavos' spawn, the shell was part of the creature, but the core suggested it was also a vessel for another organism. Was that the core? And what's that? A bioorganic spaceship? And what about the thing that scared her the most? The remaining Lavos bit. Of all the forms of Lavos, Luca finds the bit to be the most peculiar, vastly different than any other life form she'd ever encountered. The bud-like, rough-skinned pod had no visible organs for respiration or digestion. At surface level, the thing was virtually lifeless. But who knew? What were the vital signs for a Lavos bit? Pico, as the Reptites called it, didn't breathe or anything, but it didn't decay either. Why had the other one done so? Over several weeks, Luca catalogs the anatomy and physiology of Lavos inside and out, learning everything she can. By the end, she knows more about the physicality of Lavos than perhaps any human ever would. And yet still, she hasn't found an answer to the question which has troubled her for all of the years since she first encountered the thing. What of Lavos' sentience? Was it a being of intent or an agent of instinct? Did it aim for us, she wonders? Did it direct itself through space, or was its arrival on the planet driven by instinct? Or was it all just a coincidence? To what capacity did it control its use of magic? She personally had witnessed Lavos forming time gates and using powerful spells which seemingly formed from deep space. Wasn't that proof of conscious effort, and thereby proof of a sentient consciousness? She met an impasse with the Reptite sages on this issue, who kept insisting higher-level life forms may also perform magic instinctively and without intention, the same way a snake might coil and strike in self-defense. The Reptites' opinion was that, after all their investigation, there was nothing to suggest Lavos was a creature of higher consciousness. But parts of Lavos looked like a machine. Surely that implied some sort of intelligent designer. The more Luca learned, the more she wasn't sure. The level of bioorganic combination with metallic substances redefined what an organism could be. Unfortunately, the exhaustive autopsy of Lavos left Luca with more questions than answers. She felt she'd reached a dead end. It's at this time that the clever Reptite Queen Azala, seeing her chance to advance her own agenda, extends an enticing offer to the young human. Perhaps a different line of investigation was necessary. Would not the Reptites and Luca work together better if they knew more of each other's scientific knowledge? If Luca learned more about the ways of the Reptite sage, might it help in the investigation of Lavos? At the very least, perhaps with Luca's help, they might develop new technologies and forge a superior new world together. In a different chapter of her life, Luca would have been highly suspicious of continuing her alliance with Azala, especially when the Reptite Queen seemed so interested in learning about the technology Dalton had brought back from the future. But the ceasefire with the humans and resettlement project were genuine acts of goodwill, and they gave Azala a lot of credit in Luca's eyes. Besides, Luca couldn't deny the appeal of learning from the sages about weird Reptite magic. Ever since her battle with Azala and Chrono Trigger, Luca had wondered about the Reptite Queen's strange mental mastery over matter. How was she capable of such powerful telekinesis? During her time as a prisoner in the creepy ancient ghost city of Chronopolis, many incidents of high strangeness occurred, but all of them obeyed Luca's established view of physics. But Azala's weird telekinesis powers? In a pre-Lavos world? Before magic? Luca had always wondered about that. In her lifelong pursuit of knowledge, Luca had never come across anything to suggest how that was possible. It was a constant reminder that nature was a much bigger place than Luca understood. This was her chance to learn about science from the Reptites' point of view, an opportunity so amazing she'd never even dreamt of it. And so, Luca the Great, inventor of the telepods, time keys, time eggs, the bipedal robot battler Gato, becomes the first human priest in the sacred magic lab of the Reptites. By now, Luca had spent a lot of time working alongside Reptites, and she'd gotten a pretty good understanding of their language. This gave her some pretty wild insight into their worldview, which was clearly developed, clearly old, and definitely inhuman. That's what made what happened next so weird. While studying Reptite science through the lens of the Reptite language, the underlying motivations and methodology of the whole race suddenly seemed much more familiar, all strangely human in its thought processes and design. As the Reptite sages share their secrets, Luca is surprised to learn that Reptite magic was engineered by utilizing the scientific method. Indeed, the entire legacy of their archaic magical practice rested on a meticulous, slow plot of progress made possible only by the behemoth longevity of the Reptite species. With thousands of years on the planet already behind them, the Reptites had discovered, dissected, and honed an organic magical toolset based on natural forces Luca had never detected or even considered. During her time as a trainee in the lab, she watched scientists use their ancient style of magic to create telescopes and other pseudo-machines to progress their research. The ephemeral constructs they utilized for science were equal parts astounding and confusing. Reptite magic was more advanced and so much different than Luca could have imagined. The Reptites exposed her to concepts beyond gravity, beyond electromagnetism. Indeed, the depth of their knowledge about the natural world was staggering. If Luca's desire was to learn about a world beyond the one she knew, a few weeks in the Reptite Magic Lab were more than enough. Now she'd seen that world thoroughly. Her passion for science is boosted to the max, and she's truly grateful to Azala for the chance to have studied there. Naturally, her supreme gratitude and newfound camaraderie with the Reptite sages compel her to return the favor. As was Azala's expectation all along, Luca happily begins sharing her own brand of advanced scientific knowledge with the Reptites, so they can better understand the strange, anachronistic weapons Dalton had been importing from the future. Time passes. Then, as happens so often, a small discovery sends the future careening into a brand new direction. From the distant lands of prehistory, a Reptite foraging team comes across an item of monumental significance which they bring to their queen. This golden shard of rock is similar to Dreamstone, but not quite the same. The thing isn't yet in its familiar form, but it gives off a vibe which Luca knows well. It can only be the immature golden shard of the frozen flame. Luca was a captive in Chronopolis while it was in a creepy ghost state, thousands of years old, yet eerily unaging. While there, Luca learned as much as she could about the frozen flame with the expressed permission of Fate, who was still entertaining the notion Luca might reverse the lock put in place by the Promethean Circuit if she was given enough time to stare at the walls in captivity. So Luca knew most of what Chronopolis knew about the flame. They believed it was a fragment of Lavos which splintered off during the impact. The Reptite foraging team's reports of Lavos debris surrounding the site where they found the shard go a long way to confirm Chronopolis' theories about the origin of the mysterious artifact. Luca knows the flame powered all of Chronopolis and was often utilized in their time experiments. An utterly earth-shaking revelation for her. The implications were mind-shattering. Chronopolis, the most advanced human scientific outpost ever to exist, the absolute peak of human research, had been inexorably linked to, and in fact powered by, Lavos itself. Still, Luca had never seen the flame in person. She'd been locked up on a satellite island and not the main Chronopolis facility, so she didn't have access to the flame directly. Her knowledge of it came through computers and was mostly historical. Even though she was tasked with granting Fate access to the flame and therefore privy to most of Chronopolis' records, Luca got the feeling sometimes that Fate was still hiding some information about the flame behind a firewall. Indeed, Luca still had many questions about the true nature of the frozen flame and its capabilities. She's alarmed to see it here in prehistory, but also dazzled by the possibilities. If Luca's instincts warned her about what may lay at the end of the road she trod, she wasn't listening. What harm could there be in studying the flame if Lavos was dead? Again, Luca ignores her instincts in pursuit of answers, pushed along by her misplaced trust in Azala. The Reptite sages, using their archaic ephemeral machines, can run basic diagnostics and simple experiments on the golden shard. But it's Luca's brand of machinery, combined with Robo's particular insight about the flame, that really push their understanding forward. Luca's experiments with the fragment of the flame unlock a treasure trove of insight. Together, Luca and the Reptite sages began piecing together several hypotheses about the true nature of the flame, the purpose of Lavos, the origins of magic, DNA, and the self. They even developed their own theories about the flame, with some Reptites suggesting the frozen flame might be an advanced organic supercomputer built from Dreamstone. By whom, they cannot say. It's just a theory after all. These new developments send Luca's mind wandering down a path she'd never considered before. Could it be Lavos was not a malevolent creature, but simply an agent of change sent to recompose the DNA of those native forms on planets it encounters? Her musings mimic the words of the researcher in Chronopolis. Perhaps the DNA of the ones who made contact with the flame is recomposed by the sound they generate within. I wonder if life forms are just dreaming in an endless flow of music. Lavos destroyed the planet, but didn't it also bless the planet's creatures with the gift of magic? If a race of intelligent beings living in unison used this gift, might they be more likely to escape to another planet or plane of existence before the inevitable cataclysm? What difference did it make if Lavos destroyed the planet in 2300 AD, or if the sun went supernova in 23 billion? The planet's lifetime was finite after all. Perhaps Lavos' true function was to supply creatures of a planet with magical abilities that might let them transcend the physical plane, like Massa and Moon, the mysterious apparitions from Inhassa. If the Kingdom of Zeal had not destroyed itself by abusing Lavos, if they'd instead monitored the creature's activities while living in harmony with it and the planet, surely their descendants would have fared much better when the day of Lavos finally came in 1999. Was the disastrous future humanity encountered Lavos' fault? Or Queen Zeal's? This is where Luca's head was after an extended period of time with the immature frozen flame. With that as a backdrop, you may forgive her for what came next. You see, inevitably, things took a sinister turn. It was only a matter of time before Azala and the Reptite sages got ideas. How would this mysterious golden shard interact with the Lavos bits? Out of an obvious abundance of precaution and a lingering fear about Pico's potential, Luca had already declared this option off the table. But, as clever as the human scientist was, she was still only human. Azala owed nothing to any ape, no matter how smart or useful they were. Besides, Azala had never witnessed Lavos' true destructive potential. To her, it was a meteor which could be killed with laser guns the moment it landed. Thus, she was recklessly emboldened to experiment with the creatures which she should have feared the most. And so, unbeknownst to Luca, Azala began conducting her own secret experiments, repeatedly exposing the catatonic, stateless Lavos bits to the immature flame. Not only Pico, but Gob as well. You see, as you may have guessed, the healthy Lavos bit had not disintegrated as Azala told Luca. Instead, Azala stashed it away and continued research and development with Gob in secret. She could not risk letting a weapon of such potential fall into the hands of a human such as Luca. Luca had saved their race when she warned them about Lavos the first time. This time, the Reptites did not heed her warning, and so inevitably came the day when she arrived at the lab, horrified to see Pico and the shard of the frozen flame suspended for examination. Luca goes into a panicked rage, yelling at the sages about the dangers of the bit, saying it should be kept on ice or eliminated altogether. Who knows what sort of reaction might be triggered by its interaction with the frozen flame? They are dealing with things they simply don't understand. Unfortunately, it's too late. Azala simply tells her to watch. She raises her reptile hand, and Pico turns, almost imperceptibly, to face her. So, it was alive. Luca watches as Azala closes her eyes and puts her hand on the thing. She says, fear, abandonment, confusion, curiosity. Azala says she doesn't know if it was the flame or simply time which woke Pico, but touch alone was enough to feel what it was thinking. She implores Luca to try. Cautiously, fatefully, Luca touches the bit. Whereas before the thing was lifeless, now it was far from it. When touched, it was a vastly empathetic organism which communicated emotionally. Luca feels only an impulse, a deep emotional echo as the creature has no discernible language. The things she feels mirror Azala's list of emotions: fear, abandonment, confusion, and curiosity. Luca had felt the same emotions from Kid in her early years. It was this strange wrinkle, a fleeting thought Luca barely noticed, that shaped future history. For it was this impression, drilled deeply into Luca's psyche by this fragment of the superorganism Lavos, that convinced Luca that the bit was only a pupa, the infantile form of a much larger creature, and, like all infants, it was an innocent and harmless thing. Had Luca known the result of entertaining this notion, she surely would have destroyed the bit then and there. However, Luca was never one to take an innocent life, especially one of such potential significance. In its infancy, this bit was a clean slate upon which to forge a new understanding of this being which could cause so much destruction, but also held so much promise. What could they learn from this, a legitimate, living, extraterrestrial entity? What had she learned already in but the briefest of moments? Slowly, Luca's horror turned to interest and excitement. Many years later, Luca had to wonder, had her mind been twisted by her work with the shard of the frozen flame? It's possible. But if she faced the question honestly, she knew it wasn't the whole truth. Any sort of brainwashing by the bit or the flame alone would not have been enough to get her to reopen the file on Lavos, which she did. You see, for Luca, there was another, more personal reason to do what she did next. During that time, Luca grieved for her friends and watched as Poor's military might took over her homeland. For years, Luca lived under the shadow of tyranny, putting in occasional work with Lucia in the Porian science lab in exchange for relative peace at her home. She knows that one day there needs to be an uprising, but she's also smart enough not to challenge Dalton and Poor directly. Brute force wouldn't solve this problem. Besides, even if she did just storm into Poor and flare Dalton into oblivion, that wouldn't bring her friends back to life. Maybe, if she could steal the epoch back and restore its time travel function, she could fix everything somehow. But how many soldiers would she have to fire to for that? Besides, it was too risky. Messing around with time was dangerous. That's the whole reason they dismantled the epoch in the first place. Most importantly, she had a baby to take care of now. The child she'd found in the woods, who she'd named Kid. Now that she was responsible for her adopted sister, Luca couldn't rush into battle and put the baby at risk. She wasn't even sure she was knowledgeable enough to make the epoch time phasable anyway. Plus, if she did manage to go back in time again, would she still meet Kid? Maybe, when Kid was older, they could try something crazy together. But not now. She needed to study. So Luca lays low. She stays off Poor's radar as much as possible and enjoys what she has. For the sake of Kid, she doesn't make waves. She carries on with her studies and complies when Porian troops occasionally demand things from her. It wasn't ideal, but it was mostly peaceful. She still had her life and her family home. Eventually, she took in a handful of other children which had been orphaned by the Porian war machine. Despite all she'd lost, Luca felt happy. Life was tragic and beautiful in many ways. But of course, in the back of her mind, Luca was always hatching a plan. Did she even need to fight Dalton for the epoch? What if she could learn how to build a time egg herself? And so the seasons passed and Luca the Great kept her head down. As we would expect, every now and then Luca reminisced about her adventure through time and her friends. When she did so, there was one curiosity she often found herself coming back to, the magical abilities of Marl and Frog. Although both of them had shared the innate element of water, their skills manifested in two very different forms, Frog as water and Marl as ice. If water could be water and ice, might fire, lightning, or shadow have other forms as well? She'd seen Dalton summon golems from a place she knew not. He was a fire type like her. Did she also have that ability? How about Shala's magic? She had really strange skills which Luca didn't recognize. But if what Specchio told them was true, she must have had an innate element as well. Was Shala perhaps a shadow or lightning type that operated in a different area of the spectrum than Magus or Chrono? It was a fun idea to think about, but she was only able to study fire-type magic, and she wasn't about to try and summon any monsters to her orphanage. The reason I bring this up is because it's a great segue. You see, after Chrono Trigger, there was another person out there pushing the limits of his abilities and making discoveries which ultimately confirmed Luca's suspicions about the sliding spectrums of innate magical alignments. In the ideal ending of Chrono Trigger, we see Magus, presumably in antiquity, searching far and wide for Shala. Next, we see him in Chrono Trigger DS. He talks to Chrono's party before their fight with the Dream Devourer and says some unsettling things, particularly this heavy line. So what happened to Magus between those two appearances? After Chrono Trigger, Magus goes back to antiquity a short time after the Ocean Palace incident and the fall of Zeal. While scouring the planet for Shala, he quickly finds that, although the changing oceans have removed the eternally cloudy climate, the world has become much harsher. As we've seen before, civilization is in shambles, and nature is reclaiming her territory quickly in this, the Monster Spring. Anyone who's ever played Crimson Echoes or Flames of Eternity knows how strong the monsters are in antiquity after Chrono Trigger. The Monster Spring is a shout-out to that. In these conditions, Magus' search is treacherous. To more easily survive in this new antiquity, Magus rapidly hones his magic to grow stronger and stronger. Over time, this produces interesting side effects. Due to his frequent, steady, and increasingly more powerful manipulation of dark matter, he gradually acquires a vague awareness and understanding of the place behind those black holes he's making. The place where gravity bends everything, including time and space. The place where the black wind howls. The infinite void that hangs behind the fragile veil of space-time. This gets Magus to thinking, was this really so new to him? Had he not summoned Lavos once? How had he done that? Did he pull him from the very core of the planet? Or had he perhaps latched onto the creature at another point in time and drawn it to him? Even more intriguing, when his summoning of Lavos had been interrupted by Chrono, he'd been teleported through time to Zeal, while Chrono had gone to 65 million BC. How much of the time travel at that moment had been caused by Lavos, and how much by himself? Perhaps he had more control over time than he knew. What was he capable of? Could his shadow magic hold the secrets to time travel? Before long, he was using his powers for the types of things Luca often wrote about, creating singular points of gravity to study space-time, all with the ultimate goal of finding a way to reach the time and place where his sister was, for it was clear to him by now that she was not in antiquity. As Magus probes time itself, using supergravity and dark matter to peer into what lay beyond our reality, he develops new insights into the fabric of time. Gradually, he's convinced that he can navigate it. However, he's too smart to simply jump willy-nilly into the unknown. That is, until one day, when he detects something drifting out there beyond the veil, a huge magnetic storm upon which rides a very familiar presence. It's her. Instinctively, he does an X-zone and latches on. This is how Magus finds himself in the vaguely recognizable land of 1006 AD, the year to which Shala directed the storm, which set in motion the events of Chrono Cross. After such a long quest of solitude, Magus is about to get some closure. His search for Shala in this age takes a while, but eventually lands him at Luca's orphanage where he finds Kid, whom Magus senses is his sister. Except, it's Shala, but it's not really Shala. It's toddler Shala? This is unexpected, and he's not sure what to think about it. But for now, his quest is over. Luca welcomes him with a million questions about what he's been up to. At her request, Magus stays at the orphanage to be with Kid and Luca and learn more about this situation. This explains how Luca confirmed Kid's true identity as Shala's Bizarro daughter clone, and how Kid comes to possess the astral amulet she has in Chrono Cross. Magus gives it to her. Luca is fascinated by Magus's discoveries about shadow magic and pleased to see her theory about magical spectrums was correct. Magus's work supports her theory that types of magic may indeed have several mutable forms, and Luca suggests that shadow magic might also be considered gravity or time magic. Luca piggybacks on Magus's findings about time and gravity, and together they push the envelope of discovery, eventually creating the prototype time egg, which also ends up in Kid's possession. In Chronopolis, this researcher says, in the 11th century, a scientist by the name of Luca indicates the possibility of time travel through the use of a time egg, which utilizes miniature black holes. So when Chronopolis references Luca's creation of singularities and research into supergravity in Chrono Cross, they are talking about this period of time. They were just missing out on a small part of the picture. You see, during this part of her life, Luca was teamed with Magus, and they were using his abilities to pioneer this research. If Luca and Magus ever considered using their combined force to intervene in Dalton's war, they shelved the idea, sensing that they were chasing discoveries of far greater significance. And so, 1000 AD to about 1013 AD was sort of a golden age for them, living in the orphanage, raising Kid, studying together, and growing close. But all good things come to an end, and it is sad to say that perhaps their research was too successful. You see, their study of singularities led to much more than they expected. Studying space-time was one thing, but the vastness of the cosmos behind the veil led them to new areas. Fascinated by what they were onto, Magus and Luca pushed further. A Chronopolis researcher says, time is not absolute, but elastic, relative, and subjective. That there can be individual differences caused by changes in time. Perhaps the same people and life forms can even exist in several different space-times, an independent time that flows with a will of its own. Eventually, these two stumbled onto time elasticity and dimensionality, and it threw them for a loop, destabilizing their understanding of the foundations of reality. This had profound impacts on both their psyches, which never fully faded. By the end of their research, they were convinced of two things. Firstly, the universe was a lot more complicated and multifaceted than they ever suspected. Multiple dimensions and potentialities form a bedrock of uncertainty in which all of existence hangs. Magus echoes the mind-blowing implications of this in Chrono Trigger DS when he says, "There are as many worlds as there are potentialities." This line might be glossed over, but it's actually indicative of the super heavy psychological trauma that Luca and Magus had to face as their research took them down the rabbit hole and they glimpsed the true, fragile subjectivity of the universe. Another ghost researcher at Chronopolis says, "Everything is purely a problem of possibilities, and the world is only stabilized by the viewpoint of the one who observes it." This is another way to summarize Luca and Magus' first unsettling conclusion. The universe was incomprehensibly infinite, complex and ever-changing. Nothing could be taken for granted or assumed. Whether that is the future of the world from which you've come, I do not know, Magus says. Basically, I don't know if you're my friends or not. Magus's new understanding of gravity and dimensionality taught him nothing is steady. But it's their second discovery that was the big one that changed the equation for good. In the final days of their research, they detected an anomaly. We know it as the darkness beyond time, but they called it time's eclipse. There was more. Studying the patterns emanating from the place brought them to a single, terrifying, and inescapable conclusion. There was something out there, and that something was malevolent and wrong. Even though they knew not what this new foe was, its very existence shook them both to the core. For, as much as they had learned about the universe's plasticity and mutability, this presence seemed to defy those laws, constant, unchanging, and evil. Perhaps most unsettling of all, Magus felt the familiar presence he had chased on the storm of 1006 AD, as it now existed out there in time's eclipse as well, entwined with this growing evil. To Magus, there was no doubt who it was. By now, he knew that Kid and Shala were not one and the same. Though Kid was a reflection of Shala, and Magus was drawn to love her, the real Shala was still somewhere out there, and likely in great danger. Something much greater was at play out there, and he could not ignore it. Over these short but lovely years, Luca had grown to know Magus well, and she knew what he would do. She asked him to let it go, but of course he could not. So he left. He didn't ask Luca to come with him. She wouldn't have gone, but it hurt just the same. Luca's feelings for Magus had evolved in those years at the orphanage, and his departure was one of her most painful life experiences. All because he couldn't let it go. He had to know. So now we return to Luca in prehistory with a better idea of where her head was at when she agreed to do what she did next. You see, Luca's autopsy of Lavos and subsequent work with the immature flame had taught her much, but she was still an impossible step from discovering Magus's fate. However, after just a moment of contact with this Lavos bit, her optimism swelled. She still needed to process what she had seen, what she had felt, but one thing seemed certain to her above all the rest. There was a key here. This bit could indeed communicate on some level. If she could learn to interpret what she'd seen, if she could learn about its motivations, its history, its life cycle, and its abilities, maybe, just maybe, she could solve the mystery of the infinite void which Magus had disappeared into. Yes, this might work. So that's why she let her guard down after the flame reanimated the bit. It was Magus. Was he still out there? Could she learn enough from the bit to engineer a way to find him? She couldn't let it go. She had to know. And so Luca agrees to press forward with the study of the bit under the condition that she be allowed constant access to monitor its condition. Azala believes Luca is rapidly outliving her usefulness, but she can't deny the helpful insights that Luca has repeatedly brought to the table. She will squeeze the last drop out of this strange little human for this one final project, then be done with her, and the rest of them. As for Luca, her first contact with Pico had shown her things. She'd felt connected. She'd felt its helplessness, its need for protection, and to know what kind of world it inhabited. Had she not been so distracted by her first contact with the alien creature and the opportunities it presented, she might have paid more attention to Azala's waning enthusiasm for their friendship. Certainly, she may have asked more questions about the other bit, the one the reptites called Gob, and probed to learn more about the nature of its disappearance. But for now, things continue on as before. Luca and Azala agree to study Pico together. Their initial plan is purely exploratory. they will use touch to make peaceful and regular contact in order to communicate with the bit and learn as much as possible from it. However, they quickly realize this plan is flawed. Extremely powerful emotional exchange paints a clear picture. The bit, not Luca or Azala, is the one that needs answers. Pico is a creature so consumed by fear and helplessness that perhaps, just perhaps, it sparks the nurturing female instincts of both Azala and Luca to assist it. In this way, Azala and Luca find themselves becoming the teachers when they had expected quite the opposite. Azala impresses upon the bit the glory of the Reptite culture, their ancient language and history. As for Luca, she does her best to foster in the bit concepts like compassion and love, all the while listening and probing for insight. The emotional resonance with Pico was incredibly strong and so vivid. Furthermore, it was totally devoid of any malice or ill intent, and Luca felt genuinely optimistic, even excited about the situation. Over time, their bond grows stronger and stronger. Just as Azala comes to consider Pico her child or protege, so Luca would have abdicated a similar connection if pressed. Surprisingly, Pico learns to mirror her emotional frequencies of patience, understanding, and friendship. After many sessions with Pico, Luca starts to believe a Labos bit might actually be able to possess these qualities. This sends her thinking further down the road she'd briefly trod before. Perhaps Labos was not inherently malevolent. From her experience, the bit was not an evil creature. It was a simple thing, with little desire but to fulfill its biological imperative. Could it be Labos was simply an innocent creature of the cosmos, which had only been corrupted by the influence of Queen Zeal and the Mammon Machine? It reminded her of another theory she'd once heard. During her imprisonment in Chronopolis, she'd come across some of Balthazar's files about a creature he believed existed somewhere beyond time, a twisted creature which he claimed was a blend of Labos and Shala, which had come into being sometime after the Ocean Palace incident. This had chilled Luca to the core. Was this the thing that she and Magus had sensed out there? Balthazar speculated that Shala's extended contact with the Mammon Machine of Zeal had acquainted Labos with her. In the same way Pico knew Luca, Labos would have known Shala, if not consciously then from muscle memory. Balthazar theorized that when Labos felt his existence threatened by Luca and her friends, it reached out for Shala instinctively to land in Time's eclipse, where Shala must have also gone after the incident at the Ocean Palace. If Labos had somehow absorbed Shala out in Time's eclipse, would Labos have, in a sense, acquired her humanity? Could that have been the spark, the source of grief and malevolence which penetrated deep into the space-time from that unholy void? Balthazar's files had been inconclusive. He himself could not know. Was the creature he called the Time Devourer a revenge plot by Labos or a mere accident, the disastrous result of combining a human psyche with Labos' innate desire to create and become a higher life form? Of course, Balthazar had never been able to communicate with Labos in such a way as Luca could. The more Luca learned about Pico, the less she believed it was hell-bent on destroying the world. As hopeful as this outlook may have been, however, it was equally as troubling. Were she and Azala not teaching it to be a thinking creature? As time went on, Luca's suspicions became tangible fears. As Pico's communicative abilities developed, Luca was unnerved by the rate at which it developed its own intelligence. You see, although contact with Pico was still rooted in deep emotional waves of friendship, compassion, and understanding, something else began to rise. Before long, Luca was certain. Whether or not the Labos bit had been just an animal before, it was not now. It had become something more, a sentient creature with thoughts of its own, so alien she couldn't comprehend them. Its tentacles became more active. Basic problem-solving tests were met with emotional impressions of boredom or disdain for such lowly activities. Luca couldn't deny her growing unease about raising Pico in a world of language and cultural concepts. For a time, she might have been temporarily blind to the dangerous nature of the bit, but lately, she was quickly realizing how little she understood of it. She had come to care about the creature, but it was starting to scare her, and it was impossible for her to hide that fear from the very thing she was afraid of. What's more, Azala was suddenly becoming more and more scarce around the lab. It was surprising and unsettling. How could Azala so readily forget about the very important work they were doing with Pico? Little by little, Luca felt herself being marginalized and pushed out of the research. It was a bad time for her, punctuated by a moment of sheer panic on the day she made her final contact with Pico. You see, they had gotten into a rhythm of exchanging thought patterns that held familiar emotional weight. They'd gotten to know each other well this way, and in many ways it was blissful and beautiful way to reach out to another living thing. In the end, the bit had proven to be a truly marvelous teacher, and Luke felt she owed it a great deal. She was searching for a way to express her gratitude emotionally when it finally happened. After all this time, Azala's work with Pico had finally taken root. There was no mistaking what happened next. Luca heard in her mind, in perfect reptite, the word crater. Needless to say, Luca went immediately. She knew what she would find there. As certain as she was she'd heard the word crater in her mind, Pico had shown her something. He'd given her a vision, and she had only come to confirm it out of a stubborn meticulousness. Still, the familiar shape raises the hair on the back of Luca's neck all the same. The small, floating blue orb is unmistakable. It's a time gate. With this troubling development weighing heavy on her mind, Luca immediately goes to retrieve Robo before running to Azala. If she wouldn't listen before, maybe seeing the time gate would prove to the Queen that their actions may be having consequences far beyond what they could control. When she arrives at the Reptite Sage Magic Lab, all of her worst fears are realized. There she sees Azala and the sages performing some kind of ritual. The scene is beyond disturbing. The sage holds the diminutive, damaged form of Pico high up in the air, and Azala stands in front of it. Around her neck dangles the immature golden shard of the frozen flame. In her hands, a fully intact, undamaged Lavos bit. It's Gob. She demands Azala tell her what's going on. Azala regards her with annoyance. Quiet. Gob says this is what must be done. Luca's fear intensifies and it begins its transmutation into rage. Her palms begin to heat up. What Gob says? Why are you doing what Gob says? Azala ignores her. The ceremony continues and Luca watches in abject horror as the sage brings Pico closer and closer to Azala and Gob. When Pico is close enough to Gob, it extends a probing tendril to touch its brother. Azala's face wrenches in disgust as the weaker of the bits tries to interact with Gob. How dare this broken thing lay a tendril on the proud son of Azala? Then Pico's touch extends past Gob to Azala in an ineffective but obvious gesture for the shard of the frozen flame around Azala's neck. Azala watches with curiosity as Pico tries to claim the flame. The tendril tightens around the shard. Azala jerks backwards and her faithful bodyguard Nizbel foolishly intervenes. He rushes forward and snatches Pico from the arms of the sage. Suddenly, Gob unleashes a massive energy blast which strikes down the hulking Nizbel instantly, and Pico with him. Luca screams out for Pico. Everyone is shocked. Massive, powerful Nizbel lays dead, erased by the hidden power of the Lavos bit. In the confusion of the moment, Luca reaches out to make contact with Gob and comes to a powerful insight about its true calling. Gob is a monster of pure hatred and violence. Magus's words at Terra Cave ring out to Luca. Unimaginable is the power of Lavos. Anyone who dares to oppose it meets certain doom. This whole experiment was a terrible mistake. They should have finished the job and eliminated the bits on the day they killed the rest of Lavos. She begs Azala to see reason. Surely Azala can see what Gob wants. They must destroy it. Alas, like so many others, Azala's connection to the bits, to Lavos and the frozen flame, has bent her mind with their enticing power and promise. Like Queen Zeal and Dalton before her, she is an agent of the most powerful predator the galaxy has ever known. Lavos. Gob, the name doesn't matter. She regards Luca as a gnat, pushing her away with a powerful telekinetic wave of her hand. Luca fights back. Gob cannot repeat the cycle of his progenitor, becoming a parasite on the planet. She screams at Azala that she's been corrupted, but Azala can't see the danger she's in. Azala declares Luca's words a betrayal. They are confirmation of what she's always expected from the apes. The immature frozen flame around Azala's neck glows brightly. The Reptite Queen is now fully consumed by the dark influence. Too much contact with the flame has turned her into an agent of the thing, and a powerful one. As she holds Gob in her hands, Azala renews her vow to eliminate the apes from the planet, starting with Luca. She orders all of the sages and soldiers around her to attack. For the first time in a long time, Luca taps into her destructive potential and destroys the whole Reptite outpost with a single flare, or better yet, fire 2. When the inferno subsides, Azala is dead. Gob lies next to her. In the distance, Nizbel's still form clutches the corpse of Pico. Just then, a legion of reptites arrive. The scene is not difficult to read. Their queen is dead, and Luca is responsible. The horde descends to take their revenge. Luca knows she would have to kill every last reptite in order to assuage their hatred of her now. Rather than spill more innocent blood on this day and face the crushing aftermath of this horrible incident, Luca and Robo retreat to the crater. Beneath the scavenged, hollowed-out shell of Labos, Luca grabs a hunk of Dreamstone and holds it up to the Time Gate. As the reptite soldiers descend, she jumps through it with Robo. When they arrive, they're in the snowy plateaus of antiquity, although this kingdom of Zeal is quite different than the one she once knew.